Fairy Tales 2. The Brave Little Tailor. One summer morning, a little tailor sat upon his work table sewing industriously. He became hungry, and going to the cupboard, got himself a piece of bread and jelly. Because he was anxious to finish the waistcoat before the end of the day, he took a bite or two of the bread and then put it down and went on with his work. In the meantime, the smell of the sweet jelly filled the air, and flies descended in swarms. "Oh, who invited you?" asked the little tailor, and he seized a strip of cloth and struck out fiercely. Upon counting, he found before him no less than 7 dead flies. "What a brave fellow I am," he said, admiring himself. "The whole world must know this." Quickly cutting himself a belt, he stitched upon it in large letters, 7 at one blow. The tailor fastened the belt round his waist and determined to show it to the world. Before he left, however, he looked round the house for something to take with him. He found nothing except a cheese and a tame pigeon. He put these into his pocket and started out. The road led over a mountain, and when the tailor reached the top, he saw a powerful giant. The tailor approached him and spoke to him, saying, "Good day, comrade. I am on my way to try my fortune. Would you like to go with me?" The giant looked scornfully at the little tailor and replied, "You jack-in-the-box, you miserable do-nothing." "That is as it may prove," said the tailor, unbuttoning his coat and displaying the belt. "Come, read here what sort of a man I am." The giant read, 7 at one blow. He thought it meant 7 men whom the tailor had killed, and was greatly astonished. Wanting to test the tailor's powers, the giant took a stone and squeezed it until a drop of water fell out. "Now do that," said the giant, "if you are as strong as you pretend to be." "Only that?" said the little tailor. "That is child's play." He thrust his hand into his pocket and pulled out the cheese, and pressed it until the whey ran out. The giant, who was quite near-sighted, thought the cheese was a stone, and could hardly believe the little fellow was so powerful. The giant picked up another stone and threw it into the air. It went so high that the tailor could scarcely follow it with his eye. "Now," said the giant, "do better." "That's quite a trick," said the tailor, "but your stone has returned to earth. Now I will throw one so high that it shall never come down again." Putting his hand into his pocket, he drew forth the bird and tossed it into the air. The bird flew up and of course did not reappear. "What do you think of that?" asked the tailor. "You certainly throw well," returned the near-sighted giant. "Now we will see how you are at carrying." He then led the tailor to an enormous fallen oak. "If you are strong enough," he said, "help me carry this tree out of the wood." "Gladly," answered the little man. "You take the trunk on your shoulder, and I will carry all the branches and twigs." The giant took the trunk on his shoulder, but the tailor hopped up on the branch and rode along, whistling happily. Not being able to see around the huge trunk, the giant unknowingly did all the work, even to carry the little tailor. The giant, however, soon found the burden too heavy, and cried out, "Stop! I must let the tree fall." The tailor sprang nimbly off, seized the tree with both arms, as if he had been carrying it, and said to the giant, "What, a great fellow like you not able to carry a tree?" They left the oak where it fell and continued on their way till they saw a cherry tree growing by the wayside. The giant seized the top of the tree where the ripest fruit hung, bent it down, handed it to the tailor, and bade him eat. Just as the tailor took hold, the giant let go, and the bent tree sprang back into place, and the little tailor was tossed up and over the land and on the other side. "Ha!" roared the giant. Don't you have the strength to hold down a mere bush?" "Oh, I have strength," replied the tailor. "I jumped over the tree on purpose. Jump over it yourself if you can." The giant gave a leap, but one foot caught on the branches, so again the little tailor had the better of him. Then the giant said, "As long as you are such a brave fellow, come into our cave and spend the night with me and my 6 brothers." The tailor was willing, and followed him into the cave. There he found 6 giants seated by the fire. After supper the giant pointed to a huge bed and told the tailor he might take it for the night. But it was much too big for him, and he curled up on the pillow in the corner instead. Just before daybreak, the giant, supposing the tailor to be sound asleep in bed, took an iron bar and beat the bed till the bedclothes were in ribbons. Then, quite sure he had killed this dangerous man, the giant and his brothers went to the wood. Before long, who should come along but the tailor, whistling merrily as if nothing had happened. Sure now that he would kill them all at one blow, the giant took to their heels, and the tailor saw them no more. The little man went on, and after traveling a long time, came to a royal palace. Feeling extremely tired, he lay down on the grass in the courtyard and fell asleep. While he lay there, people came by and read on his belt, 7 at one blow. "Ah," they said, "what a great soldier this is," and they hurried to tell the king. The king thought such a powerful fighter would be useful in case of war should break out, and he sent one of his couriers to ask the tailor to take command of the army. The courier stood patiently waiting till the tailor awoke, and then he delivered his message. "That is why I am here," replied the little tailor, who by now was quite convinced of his own bravery, and had completely forgotten that the 7 he had killed were only flies. "I am quite ready to take command." Now the king's generals were jealous of the little tailor and wished him 1,000 miles away. "What can be done?" they said. "If we begin to quarrel with him and get into fighting, he can slay all 7 of us at once. We cannot risk that." So they went in a body to the king and asked to be discharged. "We are not able," they said, "to stay in the same army with a man who kills 7 at one blow." The king was sorry that all of his old friends and faithful officers wanted to leave him. He wished that he had never beheld the stranger, but he did not dare to discharge him, for he feared that the tailor would kill him and all his people and then take possession of his kingdom. At last the king thought of a plan whereby he might get rid of this fellow. So he sent for the tailor and told him that in the large wood near by lived 2 giants who had committed many murders and robberies. No one dared go near them. If the tailor could conquer and kill these giants, the king would give him his only daughter in marriage and half the kingdom as a wedding present. "Well," thought the tailor, "for such a one as I, a king's beautiful daughter and half a kingdom is not bad. I do not have such an offer every day." So he replied, "I will soon overcome the giants. Surely if I am able to settle 7 at one blow, I need not fear 2. The little tailor set out, followed by 100 horsemen, but at the edge of the wood he said to them, "Wait here for me. I shall be better able to encounter the giants alone." Then, walking quietly, he looked about, and after a while discovered the giants. They were laying asleep under a tree, snoring so loudly that the tree shook. The tailor filled both his pockets with stones and climbed the tree. He placed himself on the branch directly over the sleepers, and let one stone after another fall upon the stomachs of one of the giants. The giant spluttered and grumbled for some time. At last he awoke, pushed his companion, and said to him, "Stop hitting me." You are dreaming, said the other. I haven't touched you. They lay down again, and this time the tailor dropped a stone on the second giant. What is that? He cried, waking with a start. Keep your hands off me. I haven't laid a finger on you, said the other. You're certainly dreaming. They grumbled and quarreled for some time, but they were both tired and soon went back to sleep. As soon as they began snoring again, the tailor took out a bigger stone and hit the first giant on the chest. Ouch! Yelled the giant. Springing up like a madman, he threw himself on his companion and tried to tear him to pieces. They rolled back and forth in their rage and uprooted trees and fighting until both lay dead on the ground. The tailor now came down from the hiding place. What luck, he said, that they did not tear up the tree in which I was seated. Drawing his sword, he stabbed each of the giants, and then went to the horsemen, saying, Well, that job is done. But what a time I had! The giants tore up the trees to defend themselves, but that does little good against a man like me who kills 7 at one blow. The horsemen, however, could not believe the story and rode into the wood to see for themselves. There they found the giants, and all round lay the trees torn up by the roots, so they had to believe him. The little tailor now claimed the promised reward, but the king pretended there was still more to the bargain. Before you marry my daughter and obtain half the kingdom, he said, you must perform another task. You must capture a unicorn, which runs wild in these woods. I fear the unicorn less than I do the giants, boasted the tailor. 7 at one blow is my motto. Taking a rope and an axe, he went in search of the unicorn, bidding his attendants to wait outside the wood. The creature soon appeared and charged upon the tailor instantly. The little man sprang nimbly behind a big oak, and the unicorn, who was going too fast to stop, lunged against the tree and buried his horn in the trunk so deeply he could not get it out. Ah, said the tailor, now I have you. And he tied the legs of the unicorn together so he could not run away. And then he split the trunk with his axe, released the horn, and led his captive to the king. The king, however, would not yet allow the tailor to marry the princess, but told him he must catch a wild boar, which had destroyed much of the property. Well, said the tailor, that's child's play. Let us go at once. He would not take the hunters with him, but went alone. When the wild boar saw the tailor, he rushed toward him with tusks gleaming, but the little tailor was too quick for him, and he ran into a woodcutter's hut that was near, and leapt through a window at the other end. The boar was on his heels, and the tailor, running round to the front door, closed it, and so the animal was caught. The hunters were called to see the captive with their own eyes. The hero went at once to the king, who was now compelled to keep his promise and deliver both his daughter and half the kingdom to the tailor. The marriage was celebrated with magnificence, and the tailor became a king. One night the young queen heard her husband talking in his sleep, and caught the words, "Sew, waistcoat, finish these trousers, give me the yardstick." Then she knew that her husband had worked for a living and was not suitable to be a king. She complained to her father the next day, begging his help in getting rid of the husband, who was nothing but a tailor. The king comforted her as well he was able, and bade her leave her door open the next night. "My servant will wait outside," he said, "until he is asleep, and then they will tie him up in a sack and carry him off to a ship. You shall be troubled by him no more." The young queen was pleased to hear this, but the tailor's page boy overheard the plot and told his master. "Never fear," said the tailor, "I will spoil their plan." And he went to bed as usual. When the queen thought he was asleep, she softly arose and opened the door, but the little tailor was only pretending sleep. and he began to call out with a loud voice, "Here, boy, sew this jacket, mend these trousers, or I will beat you with this yardstick. I have slain 7 with one blow, killed 2 giants, captured a unicorn and a wild boar. Why should I be afraid of those who are waiting outside my door?" When the servants heard these words, great fear seized them, and they ran away as if wild beasts were after them. And no one else ever dared go against the tailor. So the tailor remained a king, and in time his wife grew fond of him, and they ruled happily for many years. Thick-headed Jack. There was once a knight who had 3 sons. 2 of them were extremely clever, but the third was considered quite stupid. He went by the name of Thick-headed Jack. Now it happened that the king of that land had a daughter who was very beautiful. She was so beautiful that all the young men who came to court her were struck dumb at the mere sight of her, and if she smiled at them or asked them a question, they lost their wits completely. The princess grew tired of this, and she was determined to marry a man who knew how to give a ready answer and to think quickly. She sent out a proclamation saying that any man in the kingdom might come and try his luck. Both the clever sons wished to marry the princess, and so they spent a whole week getting ready to call on her. The eldest knew the whole Latin dictionary by heart and could recite every column of the daily newspaper from the past 3 years. The second son studied law and knew about state affairs. "I shall marry the princess," they both declared, and they smeared their lips with sweet oil so that they would not get dry and prevent them from quickly answering. Their old father gave each of them a beautiful horse and his blessing. Just as they were starting off, up came the youngest brother and wanted to know where they were going. When they said they were going to try to win the king's daughter, Thick-headed Jack exclaimed, "Well, I think I shall go too." The brothers laughed scornfully and rode away. "Father," begged the thick-headed Jack, "give me a horse. I have a mind to win the princess myself." "Hold your foolish tongue," cried the father. "You shall have no horse from me. You must not expect to do the things your brothers do." "Well," said Thick-headed Jack, "if I can't have a horse, I'll take my old goat." So saying, he mounted the old goat and went off down the road. "Hullo," called Jack, catching up with his brothers. "See what I've found on the road?" And he showed them a dead crow. "Blockhead," cried his brother. "What are you going to do with that?" "Why, I'm going to give it to the princess, of course." "You'd better not," said his brothers, riding off at a great speed. Jack dug his heels into the goat's side to make him go faster, and soon caught up with his brothers. "Hippity-hop, here I come," he called out. "See what I have found now." And it is not everybody who can pick this up from the turnpike road. The brothers turned to see what he had. "Stupid," they cried, "that's nothing but an old wooden shoe, with the top part broken off. Are you going to give that to the princess?" "Perhaps I might," said Thick-headed Jack. The brothers laughed and rode off at a gallop until they were a long way ahead. "Hippity-hop, here I come," cried Jack, as he caught up to his brothers for the 3rd time. "Better and better. My, this is splendid." "What have you found now?" asked the brothers. "Oh, I can't tell you," said Jack. "It's too nice. Won't the king's daughter be pleased?" "Dunce," cried the brothers. "That's nothing but mud." "Yes," agreed Jack, "but just look at the quality. It's so fine, it slips right through one's fingers." Whereupon he filled his pockets with the mud. When the brothers reached the town, they had to stand in line with hundreds of other suitors. All the people of the land stood in crowds round the palace windows to see the princess receive her beau. As soon as one of them entered the hall, where the beautiful princess was seated, he was struck dumb with awe. Then the king's daughter would exclaim, "Away with him!" and the servants dragged each one off. At last it came the turn of the brother who knew the Latin dictionary, but he had stood in line so long that he had forgotten every word of it. Besides, the room was as hot as an oven. He was determined to say something, but all he could think of was it is dreadfully hot here." "That's because we're roasting geese today," said the princess, and she laughed at her own joke, for the lad certainly looked as silly as a goose in a barnyard. "Ahem, ahem," was all he could say. "He's no good," said the king's daughter. "Out with him." And out he went. The second brother acted as stupid as the first, and he too was dragged away. Next, thick-headed Jack came galloping straight into the room, goat and all. "Puff! It's murdering hot," he cried. "Yes, but I'm roasting geese," said the princess. "That's lucky for me," said the thick-headed Jack. "Will you let me roast my crow too?" "With pleasure," said the princess. "Do you have anything in which to cook it?" "I have indeed," said Jack. "Here is a cooking pot, complete with handle." He took out the old wooden shoe and put the crow inside. "We could have a regular meal," said the princess, who loved to talk nonsense, "if we only had some stuffing." "I've got some here in my pocket," said thick-headed Jack, taking out some mud and pouring it on top of the crow. "Now, I like that," said the princess. "You always have an answer ready, and you aren't afraid to speak. I choose you for my husband. But do you know that every word we have spoken is written down and will come out in the paper tomorrow? In front of every window you see in this room there are 3 reporters. That old one over there is a terrible fix, for he is deaf as a post and cannot hear a thing." She only said that to see if she could stump Jack. The reporters shook so with laughter that they dropped a shower of ink spots on the floor. But Jack had an answer ready. "Oh, indeed?" said he. "Well, don't worry. I'll give them something to write about." With that he took out a fistful of mud from his pocket and threw it right in the reporter's face. "That was neatly done," said the princess. "I could not have thought of a better answer myself." And so it happened that the thick-headed Jack married the beautiful princess, and when her father died several years later, Jack was made king and wore a crown. The Nightingale by Hans Christian Andersen. In China, this happened a good many years ago. But that's just why it's worthwhile to hear the story before it is forgotten. The emperor's palace was the most splendid in the world. It was made entirely of porcelain, very costly, but so delicate and brittle that one had to take care how one touched it. In the garden were to be seen the most wonderful flowers, and to the most costliest of them silver bells were tied, which sounded so that nobody could pass by without noticing the flowers. Yes, everything in the emperor's garden was admirably arranged, and it extended so far that the gardener himself did not know where the end of it was. If a man went on, he came into a glorious forest, with high trees and deep lakes. The wood, indeed, extended straight down to the sea, which was blue and deep. Great ships could sail to and fro beneath the branches of the trees, and in the trees lived a nightingale, which sang so splendidly that even the poor fisherman, who had many other things to do, stopped still and listened when he had gone out at night to throw out his nets, and heard the nightingale. "How beautiful that is," he said. But he was obliged to attend to his property and thus forgot the bird. But when in the next night the bird sang again, the fisherman heard it, and he exclaimed again, "How beautiful that is!" From all the countries of the world travelers came to the city of the emperor and admired it, and the palace, and the garden. But when they heard the nightingale, they said, "That is the best of all." The travelers told of it when they came home, and the learned men wrote many books about the town and palace and the garden, but they did not forget the nightingale. That was placed highest of all, and those who were poets wrote most magnificent poems about the nightingale in the wood by the deep lake. The books went through the world, and a few of them once came to the emperor. He sat in his golden chair and read and read. Every moment he nodded his head, for it pleased him to pursue the masterly descriptions of the city, the palace, and the garden. But the nightingale is the best of all. It stood written there. "What's that?" exclaimed the emperor. "I don't know the nightingale at all. Is there such a bird in my empire, and even in my garden? I've never heard of that. To think that I should have to learn such a thing for the first time from books." And hereupon he called his cavalier. This cavalier was so grand that if any one lower in rank than himself dared to speak to him or to ask him any question, he answered nothing but "Puh!" and then went on. "There is said to be a wonderful bird here called a nightingale," said the emperor. "They say it is the best thing in all my great empire. Why have I never heard anything about it?" "I have never heard its name," replied the cavalier. "He has never been introduced at court?" "I command that he shall appear this evening and sing before me," said the emperor. "All the world knows what I possess, and I do not know it myself." "I have never heard him mentioned," said the cavalier. "I will seek for him. I will find him." But where was he to be found? The cavalier ran up and down all the staircases, through halls and passages, but no one among all those whom he met had heard of the nightingale. The cavalier ran back to the emperor and said that it must be a fable invented by the writers of books. "Your Majesty cannot believe how much is written that is fiction." "But the book in which I read this," said the emperor, "was sent to me by the high and mighty Emperor of Japan, and therefore it cannot be a falsehood. I will hear the nightingale. It must be here this evening. It has my imperial favor, and if it does not come, all the court shall be punished after supper." The cavalier ran up and down all the staircases and through the halls and corridors, and half the court ran with him, for the courtiers did not like the thought of being punished. Then there was a great inquiry into the wonderful nightingale, which all the world knew excepting the people at court. At last they met with a poor little girl in the kitchen, who said, "The nightingale? I know it well. Yes, it can sing gloriously. Every morning I get leave to carry my poor sick mother the scraps from the table. She lives down by the strand. And when I get back and am tired, and rest in the wood, then I hear the nightingale sing, and then the water comes into my eyes, and it is just as if my mother kissed me." "Little kitchen girl," said the cavalier, "I will get you a place in the kitchen with permission to see the emperor dine, if you will lead us to the nightingale, for it is announced for this evening." So they all went out into the wood where the nightingale was accustomed to sing. Half the court went forth. When they were in the midst of their journey, a cow began to low. "Oh!" cried the court page, "now we have it. That shows a wonderful power in so small a creature. I've certainly heard it before." "No, those are cows lowing," said the kitchen girl. "We are a long way from the place yet." Now the frogs began to croak in the marsh. "Glorious!" said the court preacher. "I hear it. It sounds like little church bells." "No, those are frogs," said the kitchen maid. "But now I think we shall soon hear it." And then the nightingale began to sing. "That is it!" exclaimed the little girl. "Listen, listen! And yonder it sits." And she pointed to a little gray bird up on the boughs. "Is it possible?" cried the cavalier. "I should never have thought it looked like that. How simple it looks! It must certainly have lost its color at seeing such a grand person as myself." "Little nightingale," called the kitchen maid, quite loudly, "our gracious emperor wishes you to sing before him." "With the greatest pleasure," replied the nightingale, and began to sing most delightfully. "It sounds just like glass bells," said the cavalier. "And look at its little throat, how it's working. It's wonderful that we had never heard it before. That bird will be a great success at court." "Shall I sing once more before the emperor?" asked the nightingale, for it thought the emperor was present. "My excellent little Nightingale," said the cavalier, "I have great pleasure in inviting you to a court festival this evening, when you shall charm his imperial majesty with your beautiful singing." "My song sounds best in the greenwood," replied the nightingale. Still it came willingly when it heard that the emperor wished it. The place was festively adorned. The walls and flooring, which were of porcelain, gleamed in the rays of thousands of golden lamps. The most glorious flowers, which could ring clearly, had been placed in the passages. There was a running to and fro with a breeze, and all the bells rang loudly. In the midst of the great hall where the emperor sat, a golden perch had been placed on which the nightingale was to sit. The whole court was there, and the little cook-maid had got leave to stand behind the door, as she had now received the title of a real court cook. All were in full dress, and all looked at the little gray bird, to which the emperor nodded. The nightingale sang so gloriously that the tears came into the emperor's eyes, and the tears ran down over his cheeks, and the nightingale sang still more sweetly. That went straight to the heart. The emperor was so pleased that he said the nightingale should have his golden slippers to wear round his neck. But the nightingale declined, saying that it had already received a sufficient reward. "I have seen tears in my emperor's eyes. That is the real treasure to me. An emperor's tears have a peculiar power. I am rewarded enough." And then it sang again with a sweet, glorious voice. "That's the most amiable bird I ever saw," said the ladies who stood round about, and then they took water in their mouths to gurgle when everyone spoke to them. They thought they should be nightingales too. And the lackeys and the chambermaids reported they were satisfied too, and that was saying a good deal, for they are the most difficult to please. The nightingale achieved a real success. It was now to remain at court, to have its own cage, with liberty to go out twice every day and once at night. 12 servants were appointed when the nightingale went out, and each of them had a silken string fastened to the bird's leg, which they held very tightly. There was really no pleasure in the excursions of this kind. The whole city spoke of the wonderful bird, and when two people met, one said nothing but Nightin, and the other said Gale, and then they sighed and understood one another. 11 peddlers' children were named for the bird, but not one of them could sing a note. One day the emperor received a large parcel, on which was written, "The Nightingale." "There we have a new book about the celebrated bird," he said. But it was not a book, but a little work of art, contained in a box, an artificial nightingale, which was to sing like a natural one, and was brilliantly ornamented with rubies and diamonds and sapphires. So soon as the artificial bird was wound up, he could sing one of the pieces that he really sang, and then his tail moved up and down and shone with silver and gold. Round his neck hung a little ribbon, and on that was written, "The Emperor of China's nightingale is poor compared to that of the Emperor of Japan." "That is capital," said they all, and he who had brought the artificial bird immediately received the title of imperial head nightingale bringer. "Now they must sing together. What a duet that will be!" And so they had to sing together, but it did not sound very well, for the real nightingale sang in its own way, and the artificial bird sang waltzes. "That's not his fault," said the playmaster. "He's quite perfect and very much in my style." Now the artificial bird was to sing alone. He had just as much success as the real one, and then it was much handsomer to look at. It shone like bracelets and breastplates. 33 times over did it sing, and some pieces and yet was not tired. The people would gladly have heard it again, but the emperor said that the living nightingale ought to sing something now. But where was he? No one had noticed that it had flown away out of the open window back to the green wood. "But what is to become of that?" said the emperor. And all the courtiers abused the nightingale and declared that it was a very ungrateful creature. "We have the best bird after all," said they. And so the artificial bird had to sing again, and that was the 34th time that they had listened to the same piece. For all that, they did not know it quite by heart, for it was so very difficult, and the playmaster praised the bird particularly. Yes, he declared that it was better than the nightingales, not only with regard to its plumage and the many beautiful diamonds, but inside as well. For you see, ladies and gentlemen, and above all, your imperial majesty, with a real nightingale one can never calculate what is coming. But in this artificial bird everything is settled. One can explain it, one can open it, make people understand where the waltz came from, and how they go, and how one follows up another. "Those are quite our own ideas," they all said, and the speaker received permission to show the bird to the people on the next Sunday. The people were to hear it sing too, the emperor commanded, and they did hear it, and were as much pleased as if they had all got tipsy upon tea, and they all said, "Oh," and held up their forefingers and nodded. But the poor fisherman who had heard the real nightingale said, "Sounds pretty enough, and the melodies resemble each other. But there's something wanting, but I know not what." The real nightingale was banished from the country and the empire. The artificial bird had its place on a silken cushion close to the emperor's bed. All the presents it had received, gold and precious stones, were ranged about it. In title it had advanced to be the high imperial after-dinner singer, and in rank to number 1 on the left hand, for the emperor considered that side the most important on which the heart is placed. And even in an emperor the heart is on the left side. And the playmaster wrote a work of 25 volumes about the artificial bird. It was very learned and very long, full of the most difficult Chinese words, but yet all the people declared that they had read it and understood it for fear of being considered stupid. So a whole year went by. The emperor, the court, and all the other Chinese knew every little twitter in the artificial bird song by heart. But just for that reason it pleased them best. They could sing with it themselves, and they did so. The street boys sang, and the emperor himself sang it too. But one evening, when the artificial bird was singing its best, and the emperor lay in bed listening to it, something inside the bird said, "Whizz!" Something cracked, whirr, and the wheels round and round, and the music stopped. The emperor immediately sprang out of bed and caused his body physician to be called. But what could he do? Then they sent for a watchmaker, and after a long deal of talking and investigation, the bird was put into something like order. But the watchmaker said that the bird must be carefully treated, for the barrels were worn, and it would be impossible to put new ones in such a manner that the music would go. There was a great lamentation. Only once in a year was it permitted to let the bird sing, and that was almost too much. But then the playmaster made a little speech, full of heavy words, and said this was just as good as before, and so of course it was as good as before. Now 5 years had gone by, and a real grief came upon the whole nation. The Chinese were really fond of their emperor, and now he was ill, and could not, it was said, live much longer. Already a new emperor had been chosen, and the people stood out in the street and asked the cavalier how their old emperor did. "Psst," he said, and shook his head. Cold and pale lay the emperor in his great gorgeous bed. The whole court thought him dead, and each one ran to pay homage to the new ruler. The chamberlains ran out to talk it over, and the lady maids had a great coffee party. All about, in all the hills and passages, cloth had been laid down, so that no footstep could be heard, and therefore it was quiet there, quite quiet. But the emperor was not dead yet. Stiff and pale he lay on the gorgeous bed, with the long velvet curtains and the heavy golden tassels. High up a window stood open, and the moon shone upon the emperor and the artificial bird. The poor emperor could scarcely breathe. It was just as if something lay upon his chest. He opened his eyes, and then he saw that it was Death who sat upon his chest, and he had put on his golden crown and held it one hand the emperor's sword, and in the other his beautiful banner. And all around, from among the folds of the splendid velvet curtain, strange heads peered forth, a few very ugly, and the rest quite lovely and mild. These were the emperor's bad and good deeds that stood before him now that death sat on his heart. "Do you remember this?" whispered one of the other. "Do you remember that?" And then they told him so much that the perspiration ran from his forehead. "I did not know that," said the emperor. "Music! Music! The great Chinese drum!" he cried, "so that I need not hear all they say." And they continued speaking, and Death nodded like a Chinaman to all they said. "Music! Music!" cried the emperor. "You little precious golden bird, sing, sing! I have given you gold and costly presents. I have even hung my golden slipper around your neck. Sing now, sing!" But the bird stood still. No one was there to wind him up, and he could not sing without that. But Death continued to stare at the emperor with his great hollow eyes, and it was quite fearfully quiet. Then there sounded from the window suddenly the most lovely song. It was the little live nightingale that sat outside on a spray. It had heard the emperor's sad plight, and had come to sing to him of comfort and hope, and as it sang the spectres grew paler and paler. The blood ran quicker and more quickly through the emperor's weak limbs, and even Death listened and said, "Go on, little nightingale, go on. But will you give me that splendid golden sword? Will you give me that rich banner? Will you give me the emperor's crown?" And Death gave up each of these treasures for a song, and the nightingale sang on, and it sang of the quiet churchyard where the white roses grow, where the elder blossoms smell sweet, and where the fresh grass is moistened by the tears of survivors. Then Death felt a longing to see his garden, and floated out at the window in the form of cold white mist. "Thanks, thanks," said the emperor, "you heavenly little bird. I know you well. I banished you from my country and empire, and yet you have charmed away the evil faces from my couch, and banished death from my heart. How can I reward you?" "You have rewarded me," replied the nightingale. "I drew tears from your eyes when I sang the first time. I shall never forget that. Those are the jewels that rejoice a singer's heart. But now sleep, and grow fresh and strong again. I will sing you something." And it sang, and the emperor fell into a sweet slumber. Ah, how mild and refreshing that sleep was! The sun shone upon him through the windows when he awoke refreshed and restored. Not one of his servants had yet returned, for they all thought he was dead. Only the nightingale still sat beside him and sang. "You must always stay with me," said the emperor. "You shall sing as you please, and I'll break the artificial bird into 1,000 pieces." "Not so," replied the nightingale. "It did well as long as it could. Keep it as you have done till now. I cannot build my nest in the palace to dwell in it, but let me come when I feel the wish. Then I will sit in the evening on the spray yonder by the window and sing you something, so that you may be glad and thoughtful at once. I will sing of those who are happy and those who suffer. I will sing of good and of evil that remain hidden round about you. The little singing bird flies far around the poor fisherman, to the peasant's roof, to everyone who dwells far away from you and from your court. I love your heart more than your crown, and yet the crown has an air of sanctity about it. I will come and sing to you, but one thing you must promise me. Everything, said the emperor, and he stood there in his imperial robes, which he had put on himself, and pressed the sword, which was heavy with gold, to his heart. One thing I beg of you, tell no one that you have a little bird who tells you everything. Then it will go all the better. And the nightingale flew away. The servants came in to look at their dead emperor, and, yes, there he stood. The emperor said, "Good morning."